千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Let's return to Tao Te Ching, Chapter 2. Here, once again, is the chapter title. The first character, as I mentioned previously, is Guan, detached observation. This character becomes very important to this particular chapter as we continue our discussion into the second half. The art of skillful living all boils down to observations without attachments, leading to actions without attachments. So more about that later. Here is the chapter itself. And as always, we did our sectional analysis. We broke it down into 4 sections. Here's how they look. The halfway point is between line 8 and line 9. So lines 1 to 8 will be the first half. 9 to 17 will be the second half. Each half is further divided into 2 subsections. Last time, we covered the first half. We talked about the first 2 lines, about beauty versus ugliness, goodness versus evil. We also talked about lines 3 to 8. That is a section 2, devoted to complementary dualities, about how everything in the world can be seen or revealed in its opposite. And as a preview, I also went over line 9, therefore the sages. And that was a preview about the concept of the sage. And chapter 2 is the first appearance of it. This is the point we will pick up again today as we continue on with the second half of this chapter. So before we do that, a quick recap on the concepts we covered last time. In this recap slide, one of the complementary dualities we talked about was being and non-being, or existence and non-existence. We went through an example showing trees chopped down as timber, timber being cut into wooden boards, then the wooden boards being further crafted and assembled into furniture. Every step of the way is a transition from being to non-being, and also from non-being to being. Something that did not exist before, like furniture, coming into existence from the raw material. This is the process of creation and destruction. As something is being created, something else is being destroyed. The creation of furniture is the destruction of timber as timber. Wooden boards as wooden boards. They no longer exist as such. The same raw material has taken on a different form. So the transition is also a transformation. all of this is something that's repeated at all scales, all levels of existence. It certainly happens at the universal scale, cosmic creation, but also at the personal level, which is being depicted in this slide. This is an ever-present process that is happening all the time. Another complementary duality we discussed before was more and less, sufficiency and insufficiency, adequacy, inadequacy. So we talked about how Tao cultivators could leverage the complementary dualities in a skillful way. This example that we used previously is a common saying in Mandarin, 比上不足，比下有余. The translation for that, it's divided into two parts with 4 characters each. The translation would be compare above, not enough. Compare below, have excess. This is a relatively rare example in translation where every word in English matches every character in Chinese. In other words, first character, 比, that's compare. Second character, 上, that's above. Third character, 不, that's not. Fourth character, 足, enough. So, happy coincidence, giving us sort of a flavor of the original. So what does that mean? Well, I think it's quite plain, but basically, we're saying that compared to those who possess a lot, I don't have that much. And this is true to just about everyone. And then the second line, compared to those who possess little, I have more than enough. This is also true for just about everyone. Now, people may say, what if you happen to be the richest man on the planet? Well, that role actually changes as the stock markets fluctuate up and down. You've got different people who take the number one spot. So there is always that comparison. Now, the meaning is pretty clear. The meaning can be approached in a negative way or a positive way. The idea behind this common saying is that we can all look at the same characters, understand the same meaning, and yet take from it an interpretation that is negative or positive. As we talked about before, a negative approach, looking at the first line, compare above, not enough, that can result in envy and resentment, bitterness. In a similar way, second line, compare below, have excess. That, in the negative approach, can result in arrogance, looking down on other people. So just like that, Tao cultivators can pick and choose the positive approach. That is the approach that brings meaning and empowerment in life. And as you can see there, toward the bottom of this slide, the first line, I look at those above me and I feel humble. I don't have that much. There's a lot of reasons for me to be connected to humility. And the other way is also true in the positive approach. I look at the less fortunate and I feel grateful. I feel like I'm in the mood to share what I have with them. Rather than to feel arrogant and superior, this can be the catalyst for compassionate actions. In both cases, the Tao remains constant. It doesn't change. We are the ones whose minds, feelings, emotions can change depending on the perspective that we pick. And let's go to the next recap slide. This is probably the most striking metaphor or visualization that we discussed last time. The great circle of the Tao, which Zhuangzi described as the heavenly wheel. Zhuangzi wrote, they begin and end like a ring. That's referencing the myriad things, all living things. One cannot comprehend their order. This is called the heavenly wheel. When Zhuangzi said one cannot comprehend their order, I remarked that this is very similar to our familiar expression, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And we also, of course, in Western culture, we talk about the circle of life. So these all touch on the circular nature of existence itself. So then the remarkable metaphor, the visualization, is the heavenly wheel. As I talked about before, I've added an image this time to make it clear. The wheel is not like the wheel of a carriage. This is referencing the potter's wheel. The last two characters in the original, Tianjun, that you see there, the last two characters to the right, that last character there, Jun, is the spinning wheel to make pottery. As the wheel spins, the hands of the potter are shaping the pottery into something useful, like a vessel. This is the metaphor to describe the working of the Tao. The Tao being the source of creation and also the force that shapes all living things, including us. Imagine yourself as pottery on this wheel, potter's wheel. The hands of the Tao are shaping you as the forces happening in your life. Will it shape you into something useful, beautiful, both? Well, because we are part of the Tao and the Tao is part of us, the hands of the Tao are our hands as well. We are also shaping our lives as if we are the craftsmen working at the potter's wheel. It is spinning even as we speak, and we have a choice in how to shape it. And finally, the last recap slide is about when we concluded our discussion on complementary dualities by listing some of them along the great circle of the Tao as examples. Then we also listed the key ideas that we can all note from the concept. Everything makes sense in comparison with its complement, like long and short, big and small. Nothing is absolutely good or bad in itself. It's all relative in comparison with something else. That said, we can still work toward what is more positive for us in our lives. The existence of one side guarantees the existence of the other. If there is a long, there must be a short. If there is a big, there must be a small. If there is something easy, there must be something difficult. And lastly, anything can be one or the other depending on situational context. Something that appears long in one context becomes short in another. Something that is big in one context becomes tiny in another. A task that seems very difficult can become easy compared to something else that's even more difficult. So these are fluctuating and flexible, and by learning how to use them, we leverage the Tao to our benefit. This is the slide we ended up on last time. It is the introduction to the concept of Shenzhen. The meaning of this term is the person with divinely inspired wisdom, or the divinely wise person. This term has been, should never be, translated as holy man or evolved individual. Those are suboptimal or erroneous translations. It is an important concept. This is the first appearance of it, but it appears 30 more times throughout the Tao Te Ching for a total of 31 times. So now, I think we're ready to delve into Shenzhen. What does Lao Tzu mean when he talked about Shenzhen? Here's the slide for that. Who are the sages as described by Lao Tzu? So Lao Tzu describes the Shenzhen in many different ways. And I've singled out 3 ways that are not the only ways, but representative. Number 1, Shenzhen is an enlightened Tao cultivator chosen by the people to lead. The Shenzhen is someone that people trust, and someone who has cultivated the Tao. People believe that this person will be much less likely to be corrupted by power. And we know power has an absolutely insidious corrupting effect. So the example to represent this comes from Tao Te Ching, chapter 7, where it says, therefore the sages place themselves last, but end up in front. That just means that the sages basically put themselves out to be of service to everybody. And people perceive this in the course of time. They decide that, well, the best person to lead us, if the person who has been of service to us all this time. So they push the sage to take a position in the front to lead, whereas the sage preferred to be behind to serve. Second, a sage is an advisor who emphasizes practical sustenance over physical pleasure. This could be advisor to the king or emperor. It could also be an advisor to you and me. When we're reading and studying the Tao, we're basically enlisting Lao Tzu as our personal advisor. And Lao Tzu himself would emphasize the practical, would emphasize that which will sustain us rather than the desires that can give us pleasure. Because Lao Tzu also had the wisdom to realize that the pleasures can be transient and they can numb our senses if we indulge in them too much. So an example for this comes from Tao Te Ching, chapter 12. It says, therefore, the sages care for the stomach and not the eyes. That is why they discard the other and take this. Now, although this example comes from chapter 12, it is something that begins in this chapter and gets further emphasized in the next one, chapter 3. And this is because the more in tune with sagacity people become, the more they look to the basics of life. You want to mind the bare necessities of life, and guard against the excess in physical sensations that can make you jaded. And number 3, another important characteristic of the sages. Who is the sage? Well, the sage is a mentor who uses the Tao to set an example for people to follow. Now, the advisor can just tell you the advice, but it's even more powerful if the advisor is a mentor who will show by example. This we can see in chapter 22 of the Tao Te Ching. It says, therefore, sages hold to the One as an example for the world. So my suggestion to everyone is to look for mentors in your life whose examples inspire you. And I would also suggest that you should endeavor to set a good example in yourself for others to follow. And quite naturally, when you have attained a higher level of refinement in the Tao, you will come across situations people will look to you for guidance, for leadership, etc. So in number 1, they may look to you to lead. In number 2, they may look to you for advice. In number 3, they may want you to mentor them. When that is the case, you have gotten yet another step closer to sagehood, or sagacity, the wisdom of the sage. Next, I would like to take a look at line 10. Line 10 is the introduction of this concept in the Tao, Wu Wei. The pinyin is exactly that, Wu Wei. Literally, the first character means none, and the second character usually means action. Here, it means attached action, or actions with attachments. Attachments are the conditions or the strings attached, perhaps the expectations, the hidden agenda. All of those are attachments. So the meaning of Wu Wei is Tao-centric, detached action, often minimal in nature. To act in accordance with the Tao is to be efficient and do just enough. Just do that which is necessary. Use a light touch, the soft approach, the gentle approach. So as I said, this is the first appearance of the central concept of the Tao. The term Wu Wei appears 12 times throughout the Tao Te Ching. So this is the first time, but it appears 11 more times. And that is an indication to us that it is important. So just like before, when we talked about Shenzhen, we can also talk about Wu Wei as described by Lao Tzu. So let me show you this slide that is asking that exact question. What is Wu Wei as described by Lao Tzu? And again, what I'll do is that I'll pick out 3 examples. Although it appears more times than just the 3, I want to pick the 3 that are representational. Number 1, actions that are natural and uncontrived, yet extremely effective. We see this in the next chapter. It says, act without contrivance, and nothing will be beyond control. So this idea that Wu Wei enables and empowers you to be able to accomplish anything is repeated throughout the Tao Te Ching. Number 2, Wu Wei is the way of the Tao, or the way of nature itself. It is a way that we can learn, we can observe and emulate. So Tao Te Ching chapter 37 says the following: the Tao is constant in non-action, yet there is nothing it does not do. Here in this context, the sages are using the Tao as being synonymous with nature. This is also something that begins in this chapter and is reinforced periodically throughout the Tao Te Ching. Sages are always looking at nature to learn about the functioning of the Tao. And then number 3, Wu Wei is the spontaneous and unforced manifestation of virtues. This appears in chapter 38. Chapter 38 is special in that it is the first chapter in the second book, in the second half of the Tao Te Ching, De Jing, the book of virtues. And therefore, it is not a big surprise that it focuses on a discussion of virtues. And here's how it connects virtue to Wu Wei. High virtue takes no contrived action and acts without agenda. So because Wu Wei is naturally flowing in accordance with the situation, in accordance with the Tao, when you apply that to the practice of virtue, it just means that virtuous actions, virtuous thoughts, all flow from you naturally. They don't need to be forced. They are not contrived. So how can we better understand this concept? When we look at it this way, I think it becomes clear. I think pretty much anyone who's been reading books about the Tao, you probably have come across very vague and sometimes a bit distorted ideas about Wu Wei. So let me talk about how we can better understand this concept. We want to know what it is not. For instance, despite the literal meaning of non-action, Wu Wei is not about doing nothing. There's some action involved in Wu Wei. Occasionally, your detached observations will inform you that all is well. No need to do anything, just observe. In which case, the minimal action, or Wu Wei, is the act of observation. That's it. Although relaxation is important, Wu Wei is not primarily about relaxing. Rather, Wu Wei is about the smooth actions you take with a relaxed frame of mind. So that's an important distinction. It's not about, hey, relax, take a breath. It's about the actions you take from that frame of mind when you have already relaxed. Wu Wei is not about discarding plans or to-do lists. Sometimes this gets erroneously emphasized by Western study of the Tao. The study of the Tao is not about discarding plans or to-do lists. The Tao Te Ching itself, if you get the version that is properly translated, you see that Lao Tzu talks about plans all over the place. To-do list is just another form of a plan. It's a step-by-step plan. And lastly, Wu Wei is never used by the sages as an excuse for laziness or apathy. So these are the primary misconceptions about Wu Wei. I wanted to list them to talk about what Wu Wei is actually not. Then, of course, we want to talk about what it actually is. First, Wu Wei is about following the natural path in life situations. Everything that happens in life has a natural flow in accordance with the situation. Going against that is like swimming upstream. You end up tiring yourself out and you cannot get very far. Contention is a common example. If you are contentious, then you find yourself going against the natural flow. You definitely will get exhausted before too long. Now, what would Tao cultivators do in a situation that is potentially contentious if contention is going against it? Well, instead of streaming upstream, to flow downstream would be the equivalent of turning an enemy into a friend. Now, we know that's not easy, but that would be congruent with the direction of the Tao. And when people realize that it's a possibility, they will engage in the actions that make it a much more likely outcome to turn enemies into friends. Second bullet, Wu Wei springs from a mindset that is composed and unhurried. So this corresponds with the second sub-bullet. It says, although relaxation is important, Wu Wei is not primarily about relaxing. When you are able to relax, though, your mindset is composed and unhurried, and you will then be able to act in a much more efficient and effective way. Another sub-bullet, Wu Wei means optimal understanding leading to optimal actions. This is another way to say that it means observing without attachments, optimal understanding, leading to actions without attachments, optimal actions. People describe this, people that actually understand Wu Wei can describe this in a variety of different ways using different words that all boil down to the same thing. So for instance, there is a scholar who says Wu Wei is a state of perfect knowledge of the reality of the situation, perfect effectiveness, and the realization of a perfect economy of energy. So that's what it is. And we can say it this way: optimal understanding, optimal actions. Lastly, Wu Wei is characterized by non-contention and smooth achievements. So following the natural path, the path of peace, the path of harmony, non-contention. This could take a variety of forms. Non-contention could be avoiding conflict. It can be to turn enemies into friends, as I mentioned. It can also mean taking quick, effective, economical actions to disable the enemy. Yes, Wu Wei can be about fighting as well. It can be about taking actions in combat. So Wu Wei is about peace, but it can manifest in battle. One intersection of smooth flowing peace, movements, actions, and martial arts is Tai Chi. Tai Chi is not just a form of exercise. It has always been designed to be a reminder of the Wu Wei state of mind. Those that recognize this can use Tai Chi as a reminder in everyday situations. So let's talk more about that, the application of Wu Wei to life. I mentioned before, optimal observation, optimal actions. Let's talk about observations. Let's take a step back and see how actions can be varying and different for varying and different results. With attachments, like desires, one sees the appearance, the manifestation, the outer external manifestation or the surface appearance. Now, this comes from the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching. With attachments such as desires, one can only see the manifestation, and surface appearance is incomplete and possibly misleading. This, in fact, is the basis of modern marketing, advertising. Creative advertising can sell products by emphasizing the surface level, the appeal of how it looks, the appeal to emotions, and it can also be an appeal to greed. If you get this, it'll save you money. It can be an appeal to lust. Hence the use of models. So that is the first part of it. Observation. Once you really get this concept, you cannot look at marketing and advertising the same way. Whenever you see any kind of marketing or advertising, you will always see this right here. It's following this line that Lao Tzu wrote 2,500 years ago. Lao Tzu also wrote the complement. Without attachments, that is, if you are in the desireless state, one can look within. And what I mean by that is one can gain the internal look beyond the surface appearance to see the essence. The internal essence is what provides valuable insights. It tells you what's really going on. It tells you what's up. So the dichotomy that you see here, with and without attachments, the desiring state versus the desireless, as I mentioned, this is all from Tao Te Ching, chapter 1. It leads into the message, the central message in this chapter, chapter 2. And it's about taking action. Just like observation, actions can have the dichotomy with and without attachments. With attachments, you can trip over yourself or do too much. Because surface appearance can be misleading, your actions can be misguided. Misguided actions look like overeager, overzealous actions, over the top, overkill, like doing too much. So what about actions without attachments? Well, it looks better. One can act with optimal efficiency, just like we talked about, the perfect economy of energy. Actions that are accurate, precise, and exactly what is needed. So let's link up observation and actions. And here's what usually happens in life that we can see. Observations with attachments always lead to actions with attachments. This, in fact, is the basis of scams, grifting, con games. It starts with the observation at the surface level that appeals to greed, human emotions, much like marketing and advertising. But then it leads into actions that are misguided, which can be material loss, like getting ripped off. So this is exactly what we don't want in life. Advertising, marketing will always be with us, and that's part of the economy. Just recognizing advertising and marketing as what they are will give us a degree of mental protection. Recognizing possible scams, grifting, and con games will give us further protection, so we watch ourselves to not get into the trap of actions with attachments. So what about the other side of the coin? Without attachments. Observations without attachments opens up the possibility of graceful, effortless success. Please note I said it opens up the possibility. That is because it is also possible to start out in the desireless state, but then get drawn into a desiring state, in which case observation without attachments can lead to actions that become increasingly attached. Let me give you an example. You may see someone who starts out being completely uninterested in power or positions of authority. But for situational reasons, for maybe a fluke, for something that happens, that person is put into a higher position with authority, with some power, like, for instance, a company promotion. When this person occupies that position, there is a possibility that he or she becomes changed by having power, becomes attached to the position of authority, and would do anything to maintain that, to hang on to it. That is a possible scenario. We see that from time to time. But in general, Tao cultivators understand this possibility and therefore become far less likely to fall into this trap. Tao cultivators can let unattached actions flow into unattached, the unattached observations can flow into unattached actions in a smooth and effortless way. And that's what we're depicting here, to start with observation and with effective action. Next, let's go to line 10 as a whole. The sages manage the work of detached actions. Let's talk about the work of detached actions. As I mentioned, it can take a variety of forms. Sometimes the best way, the way of the Tao, is just to let it be. That's when Wu Wei literally is non-action. That's when you sense everything will work out just fine, so there's no need to interfere. You let it play out on its own. And this is perhaps the reason why there's the misconception. But Wu Wei actually means more than that. Sometimes you need to act minimally. That is, you can change things just by showing up and being present. That is a minimal action there. You may not need to do anything more than being present. Sometimes it's a nod, a smile, a gesture, a pat on the back. Sometimes that's all it takes. Minimal action. Sometimes you sense more is needed. Therefore, you do just enough with a soft approach, with a light touch. Your actions may be so seamless that people don't even realize that you have done it. And in every instance, whether it's letting it be, acting minimally, or doing a little more than just minimal to exactly what is needed in that moment. This is basically saying the sages can get things done without becoming attached to them. No fixation, no obsession, just productivity, just creativity. So this line sometimes gets mistranslated as the master acts without doing anything. You can now have the knowledge to point to that as really just one of the three possibilities. And when people didn't have access to this level of understanding, they may assume that it's some kind of deep wisdom that sounds like a paradox. No, in actuality, it's just an error that resulted from the language barrier. As I said before, the authors of Tao Te Ching books, they themselves are blocked by the language barrier. Let's continue on to line 11. Line 11 says the sages conduct the teaching of no words. So the real teaching of the sages are not in their lectures. The wise sages do not lecture people, scold them, order them around, or tell them what to do. Instead, their real teaching is done through their examples. That is because they prefer to lead and demonstrate through what they do, not what they say. They practice what they preach. They do not expect others to do what they cannot. In order to do that, they have to be consistent and congruent. What I mean by congruence is congruence or alignment with the Tao in thoughts, words, and deeds. When I say consistent, I mean consistency in what they say to different people, as well as consistency between thoughts and actions. So for instance, instead of telling people to be polite, they demonstrate courtesy in their actions, in how they treat everyone. So basically, this kind of teaching is the most effective of all. And this depicts the action-oriented side of a sage. They don't just talk, they will do. They take action, they show. Now, both 10 and 11 manage the work of detached actions and conduct the teaching of no words. They both refer to that action orientation, so the sages can be seen as a dynamic individual. They get things done, they take action because action speaks louder than words. They are definitely not about doing nothing. This is not exactly like the idea of some old guy sitting around speaking in riddles. It paints a different picture for the sages. Now, these concepts like actions without attachments, teachings without words, these can be new to people in the West. In Eastern thoughts and philosophy, they appear in many different traditions. sometimes the commonality can be a bit of a surprise. For instance, in the West, there's an idea that Confucianism is opposed to the Tao. The idea says Confucianism is all about strict rules, etiquette, protocol. Sometimes people complain about, for instance, subjugation of women, etc. They point to the Tao as the opposite. What I like to do later on is to show you an example to demonstrate that's not quite true. That's a misconception. So other times, the commonality is more expected. So for instance, many people will mix up Taoism and Buddhism, not really knowing the difference between the two. So it seems to make sense to them that Wu Wei should show up in Buddhism too. Now, some of the people will actually get into the study of Buddhism. So after a while, they may think, well, there's so much material in Buddhism, but you don't really come across any mention of a concept that is similar to Wu Wei. So they will then point to the absence as one of the differences between Buddhism and the Tao. And when I say, well, there's similarity between the two, they may be surprised. But then, if you guys recall, previously for chapter 1, I showed an example where the Buddha talked about the truth being beyond words. And he talked about it using identical words, expressed it in a slightly different style. This was all the more remarkable because in ancient times, China and India were geographically isolated, so the Buddha could not have been exposed to Tao concepts. Now, we know now that because these ancient sages, whether in India or ancient China, they tapped into the same universal source of wisdom, so they could come up with the same thing, even if they never communicated with one another. And wisdom, not expressed in words, that was not the only match. Now, I want to demonstrate Wu Wei concept that is also from the Buddha, using the same words once the ancient Sanskrit has been translated into ancient Chinese. This is in the same source that we talked about before, which was the Diamond Sutra. To get us started, I want to ask everyone to look at line 10. I have circled a couple of characters there. Look at the characters for Wu Wei. So fix those in your mind, and then we're going to go into the Diamond Sutra to look for the exact same two characters. In Diamond Sutra, this expression appears, Wu Wei Fa. The first two characters are the same. The third character means Dharma. So this is the Wu Wei Dharma. The Dharma, this particular Dharma, is often translated as unconditioned Dharma. So of course, someone who's translating from Buddhist text is not going to use a Taoist term. Wu Wei is seen as a Taoist term, but then in the Chinese translation from Sanskrit, it's the same two characters. So what exactly is unconditioned Dharma? It is the Dharma that is unchanging, always constant, regardless of karmic manifestations. So it is also translated as unconditioned existence or unconditioned phenomena. It is constant, eternal, arising, or existing regardless of what happens with karmic mechanisms, karmic manifestations in the world. In Buddhist teachings, this eternal constant concept can be synonymous with nirvana. Therefore, in the Tao context, it is the source of unattached actions. This is because pure intentions arise from the Tao. Indeed, pure intentions are the Tao. They are as real as the eternal nature of your true self. As an example, when you have pure compassion with no hidden agenda, no strings attached, no expectations, this pure compassion is part of your eternal nature that you cultivate from one lifetime to the next. It exists regardless of any changes in the material world. That is what it really means. So we already see now that this Dharma is connected to the Tao concept with the lack of attachment. Now, I also want to highlight its complementary opposite. Remember, chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching is all about complementary dualities. When we have unconditioned Dharma, unconditioned existence, unconditioned phenomena, what is the complementary opposite? 有为法. The complements of Wu Wei Dharma in the Diamond Sutra, often translated as conditioned Dharma. And you can kind of figure out what it means just by understanding the previous Wu Wei Fa. This is a Dharma that always changes. It is conditional of or dependent upon karmic manifestations in the material world. So that sounds a little bit abstract. It's easier if we think of it simply as it is the Dharma that's dependent on some kind of attachment that comes and goes in the material world. It too is transient. It too is impermanent. In the Tao context, this is the source of attached actions. And let me explain the connection. The attachment here are the transient attachments of the material world. They never last. Lust, greed, desires to possess, whether material things or people, these are all transient. When the desired things change, disappear, or are destroyed or damaged, the attachments for them will also change, perhaps fade. So in talking about this conditioned Dharma, the opposite of Wu Wei, here's what the Buddha has to say in the Diamond Sutra. So I want to provide you with the translation right away because it is important to understand the meaning of Buddha's words. And before we do that, pay attention to the last 3 characters of the first line, and you will see that it's conditioned Dharma, 有为法. Now, let's go ahead and translate. Here's what the Buddha said. All conditioned dharmas are like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, like dewdrops and lightning flash. They should, as such, be observed. What does the Buddha mean? Let's break it down. We talked about conditioned dharmas like lust, greed for certain things as transient. This is the Buddha's way of emphasizing that. So he said, look at a dream. A dream fades when we wake up. It doesn't matter how real everything seemed while we were dreaming. Upon awakening, that reality in the dream world is all gone without a trace. That is the first concept in the second line, that dharmas are transient like dreams. Then illusions. What about illusions? Well, dreams occur at nighttime. During the day, we can have daydreams or fantasies. These are illusions in the mind. They fade away when we need to deal with actual reality. Daydreams and fantasies do not survive contact with harsh reality. Then we have bubbles. What is that? Well, the Buddha is talking about bubbles in a stream. They come and go. They form and they pop. They don't last. Shadows, same thing. Shadows change when the source of illumination changes. When the light is turned off, the shadows are gone. When the light is moved around, the shadows move around as well. Next, let's talk about dewdrops. We know that dewdrops evaporate as the sun shines upon a new day. At dawn, you may still be able to find dewdrops on a blade of grass. As the morning progresses, it is soon vanished. Same transience applies to lightning flash, but even faster. When there's lightning flash for a split second, the sky is lit up. Perhaps it's a thunderstorm, but once it occurs, it is gone, never to return again. So it is perhaps the most transient of all. So the Buddha says, these things, this transience should be observed as such. His message is that we should regard them as impermanent phenomena. Here, one moment, gone the next. All material things are no different in essence. They may not disappear quite as quickly as the lightning flash, but they're still impermanent by nature. Now, we can link it to what we have discussed in this chapter, chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching. First, the beginning of this chapter speaks of beauty. And I noted that most of the world is overwhelmingly focused on physical beauty because we're physical beings. And here's the thing. Beauty is transient, but the world not only knows beauty as beauty, but we become attached to it. Once in a while, conditioned dharmas have the illusion of permanence because human perception is short-term. As we become so attached to physical beauty, it can become an obsession. From one moment to the next, it can seem as beauty is forever. In the course of time, though, not from 1 minute to the next, but perhaps 1 year to the next or 1 decade to the next, we see that is definitely not the case. We see the beauty of stars from decades ago change and fade with age. It is no different with money, fame, power, pleasures, and for the exact same reasons. And when you see the reality of the situation, you understand what people are doing. So the Buddha points out that basically we are exhausting ourselves for transient things. People exhaust themselves chasing after things that don't last. They're unreal, they're illusory. From that standpoint, it makes no sense. It is therefore time to reprioritize at a spiritual level, shift more of our time and energy to better, more worthwhile pursuits. That is, unconditioned dharmas, or wu wei, the state of detachment that is eternally aligned with the Tao. That is why Lao Tzu wrote, therefore the sages manage the work of detached actions, and detached actions will be wu wei. It is what lasts. So as we can all see, there is a definite connection, a correspondence between Buddhist teachings and the Tao. What about Confucianism? I mentioned that a moment ago, and as I said, there are still people who think it's diametrically opposed to the free-flowing Tao. This idea is certainly not the case according to Chinese legends, where Confucius regarded Lao Tzu as his master. He learned the Tao from Lao Tzu. So just as Lao Tzu wrote about the wise ruler in this chapter, chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching, Confucius also commented about the same thing. Let me show you. So we've got some text here again, and I want to ask everyone to take a look at the first two characters there. The first two characters start out with wu wei. This is a quote from Confucius. It is one of the trickier quotes to figure out, because in order to understand it, you also need to know quite a bit of historical and cultural background. That's okay. I will take you through it step by step. So now that you see the first two characters are wu wei, what is Confucius saying about that? Let me give you the translation. Those who used wu wei to govern. Was Sun not the only one? What did he do? He sat facing south with reverence. That was all. Now, without historical and cultural context, these lines are going to be puzzling. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Let me start by pointing out the important pieces. First, Sun. What you see here as Shen, what is that? Well, that's actually Emperor Sun, a legendary ruler of ancient China from more than 4,200 years ago. The depiction of Sun is at the bottom of this slide. On the upper right-hand corner of the depiction, it says Di Sun, which means Emperor Sun. Now, as I said, he lived 4,200 years ago, while Confucius lived 2,500 years ago. So this particular emperor predated him by 1,700 years. The works, the history, the deeds of the ancient emperors were required study for all the sages, all the students of the Tao at the time of Confucius and Lao Tzu. So they knew the history quite well. The first two lines basically say Emperor Sun was the emperor who used wu wei to govern, and he might be the only one of the legendary emperors. Then the second two lines, the bottom half, what did he do? He sat facing south. What does that mean? Here's where the cultural context comes in. To sit facing south means to sit on the throne. Whether it's the imperial throne or the royal throne, it must face south. It is a long and consistent tradition in all imperial dynasties. The throne customarily faced south because it is the auspicious and proper orientation. This whole concept had an ancient history as well, and it traces back to even before the time of this particular emperor, to the time of I Ching, and possibly even before that. So back in those early days, 5,000 years or more, the ideal orientation for a house was facing south. And this is because ancient China was in the northern hemisphere. In winter time, the sun will occupy the southern part of the sky. The warming rays of the sun will shine from the south, especially in the winter because, of course, it is cold. So that is why the throne is always facing that direction. And to sit facing south, it just means assuming the role of the emperor. And what Confucius says here is that this particular emperor assumed that role with reverence, meaning respect and dignity, propriety, that he used the Tao, he lived the Tao as he assumed his imperial duties. Okay, what does that mean? So the first line, 无为而治, it's governance with 无为. So the first two characters are the 无为, and then the last character there is governance. So you can translate it as governance with 无为, or use 无为to govern. Other people had translated it as efficient governance without exertion. So that's actually putting in more words in the English language than was actually in the original in the ancient Chinese. But the idea is that you can think of it as governance without attachments. When you govern without attachments, you govern without excessive rules and regulations, and also without excessive interference in people's lives. So look at these two sub-bullets. They basically summarize what it means to have efficient governance without exertion. It just means that the emperor doesn't need to exert himself setting up or commanding the establishment of excessive rules and regulations, or the means of interfering and scrutinizing people's lives. Excessive rules and regulations are a sign that the ruler is too attached to crime and punishment. These excessive rules and regulations, excessive laws, become burdensome for the people. And in response, the people will come up with ways to sidestep or ignore the law. They can do so. They figure out ways to do it without being detected. It is the same with excessive interference. It is a sure sign that the ruler is fixated on the idea that the people must be supervised at all times and kept in line. So what will happen is that people will put up with this monitoring for a while, but then figure out ways on how to hide or evade the government's scrutiny into their private business. So this, the opposite of this would not be a good way to govern. And that's the point that Confucius is trying to make. Bad governance, the ruler imposes numerous laws to punish people for what not to do. This is the negative approach. What is the complement to that? What is the opposite? This is deterrence. Deterrence is negative. Harsh punishment, relentless enforcement that results in fear. The complement, good governance. The ruler sets an example as guidance for people on what to do. the positive approach. This is encouragement. Encouragement results in positive reinforcement. So the result of good governance, Wu Wei governance, less busy work for government officials, for the emperor, smaller and more efficient government, less waste, less bureaucracy. The focus can then be directed to something that is much more constructive. So how would this be connected to the Tao Te Ching, this chapter that we're studying? Well, Lao Tzu says the sages manage the work of detached actions. This applies to the emperor. Lao Tzu also says the sages conduct the teaching of no words. This matches exactly what Confucius is saying. He's talking about setting a good example, like the ancient emperor who only sat with dignity, respect, meaning that he set an example without overexerting himself to set up laws to punish people. So I want to invite you to pause for a moment to think about all of this that we have just gone over. How can we apply this to life? Well, if you manage your life with attachments, you end up with the negative approach, the bad governance. Have you seen someone like that? Someone who has that negative approach? I think you may have. This is the person who's easily offended. This person has a lot of rules about what he or she will not tolerate. It is a natural consequence that this person will alienate people. People keep their distance, they keep away. Now, on the other hand, if you manage your life with minimal attachments, you end up with a positive approach. You become the change you want to see in the world. It starts with you. Rather than to impose requirements on other people, you impose them on yourself to set a good example. Other people notice this and they become drawn to you. So that's how we can apply this idea to life. Here's my attempt to summarize it in a table. In this right here, I just want to point out first the setting or the context. That's the column where. Ancient kingdom, that's what Lao Tzu spoke of. We can map that in modern times to modern business. And then ultimately, what is the most important? To you, mapped to you. Then let's talk about the who. In the context of the ancient kingdom, it is the ruler. That's the king. And if we switch out some words, instead of ancient kingdom, ancient empire, then the who is the emperor. In the context of modern business, the corresponding elements or person is the CEO. Then we talk about you. So first of all, you are the ruler. You are the king or queen. You are the ruler of your own existence in this world. You are the CEO in the company that is your life. So I think everyone can easily see the analogies. So we have multiple columns to fill out. We have attachments, the negative approach. We have Wu Wei, the positive approach, and then we have the Tao, the ultimate outcome. Let's talk first about what happens when there's what Confucius calls bad governance, what Buddha called conditioned phenomena or conditioned Dharma, the negative approach. We can end up where the king is focused on the royal treasury, the amount of tax collected, the opulence of the palace, the size of his army, and restrictive laws. So that is definitely surface level. It's a focus on transient things, things that don't last. And it's about doing more and too much to be burdensome to the people. How can we map that to the CEO? The correspondence is that the CEO will be focused on sales quota. How much money are we making? Investment portfolio, cost reduction, maximizing profits. And in place of restricted laws in a company, there are rules to restrict people on what they may or may not do. So again, that's at the surface level, focusing on transient things and burdensome to the employees. And you, what about your life? You can definitely be on the wrong path, as many people are in the world today, if you are primarily focused on income, position, the pecking order, possessions, cars, house, boats, things to complain about, things that you will not tolerate, things you don't like, things you criticize or condemn. The negative approach, focusing on transient things, the transient manifestations in the material world. So that is the negative. Now, let's talk about the positive. What if you have a wise ruler, a king who understands the Tao? Well, instead of focusing on the external, on the things that ultimately won't matter that much, the wise king will be focusing on building up the kingdom from within, building roads and bridges, focusing on prosperity and justice for all, safety and security, setting positive example for the people to follow. These are the things that last. Same with the company. The CEO, instead of the transient things, can be focusing on lasting values. That is, service and communication for the customers, quality of the products, to be ethical in business dealings. That will be a wise CEO focusing on what really matters. What about you living your life? You're the king of your kingdom. You're the CEO of your company. This is focusing on the spiritual and physical well-being of yourself, learning and challenging the mind. So, personal code of honor. Here we have basically the health and strength that covers spiritual, mental, and physical aspects of your being. So these are the things that you can use. These are not transient qualities like income, position. So the Tao, if the king can use Wu Wei to govern, the people are happy, productive, and loyal. The kingdom naturally becomes powerful. What about the company? Positive word of mouth spreads, bringing even more customers, more business, and doing so naturally. What about you? Well, increasing refinement of oneself, a naturally joyous feeling, sense of purpose. So the one thing that I want to note out of all these is the word naturally, which occurs in the rightmost column. What happens when you follow the Tao, the path of Wu Wei, is that it leads to a natural progression and advancement. That is the way the world works. So the secret of the sages is just that. They follow these ideas, these basic ideas in the Tao, they apply them, they speak and talk without attachments, They focus on things that are eternal, lasting qualities, not transient quantities in life. And they're able to live a life of the Tao. So we've gone over the time today for our meeting. Let me move to summary to talk about what we have discussed today. Previously, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the complements, and we can express them as yin and yang, as you saw before. We can understand the world through comparison and contrast between the parts of dualities. And then number two, measurements have meaning relative to one another, and it can change. What is long or short can become short and long. It just depends. Number three, we are free to choose the empowering perspective. So that is from the first half of this chapter. Today, we're talking about the sages. We talked about how the sages act without attachments, and you can see that's very powerful. It starts with observation, understanding by being free of desires, free of attachments, then taking very effective action. Teach without words. This is focusing on yourself, set a good example, other people will follow. There is no need to control. Instead, in the Tao, we want to give the gift of respect. An attempt to control others is a lack of respect. To let go of control is the gift of respect. And there's no need to possess. We should let go. We should set things and people free. Give the people and things the gift of freedom. No need to maintain a death grip. Lastly, no need to presume. This is the gift of humility. The gift from the Tao to all of us is the teaching on the idea of being humble, and I would urge everyone to accept that gift and to put it into practice. We can live with humility in our lives. It is part of what enables us to practice Wu Wei. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.